Are you satisfied with your understanding of sustainability? If you are not, imagine a journey together, a pluralistic one, with academia, innovators, startups, NGOs, all looking for solutions to the greatest challenge of our time. My name is Samuele Tini, and this is the Sustainability Journey. And welcome to a new episode. Today, we are going to discuss technology, and we are going to discuss solution, and we do it with academic world. In the past, we have discussed with professors, we have tried to find how innovation can solve our sustainability challenges. And we do it today with Valerie Thomas, who is the professor. Thank you so much, Valerie, to be here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I was trying to be because you have very long, so you are Chair of Natural System, Professor of School of Industry and System Engineering. But before that, and before going into the solutions, Valerie, can you discuss a bit your journey? Which are the moments that inspired your career?
Yes, thank you. So I started out studying theoretical physics, and I got my PhD in theoretical physics, and it's fabulous. I was studying all the particles and the fields and forces that make up how the universe works. And I just decided, it's great, but even if I were amazing, even if I won the Nobel Prize in that, it's just not what I wanted to do. So I thought, what do I want to do? And there are two areas. One was nuclear arms control, nuclear weapons, and the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. And the other was the environment. So after I finished my PhD, just barely, I started working on nuclear arms control. And I did that for a number of years. That was great. Really important problem. I did not solve the problem, but I think in the United States, with what happened in the Soviet Union, it's not that the problems went away, but it was not so much a technical problem anymore. And so I decided I want to work on these energy and environmental problems because I really think it's not obvious. We need new answers, and there's work to be done. So I've been doing that for quite a while now.
And fantastic. And I really liked the way we need answers. Now we need action, and we need also science-based targets and work. So you have a wonderful resume. I've seen you have done. You are a fellow of many scientific society association. You've been at Princeton, Carnegie Mellon. So how all this experience has shaped you, your approach to environment and policy change, and how do you see those urgent needs for us?
So it might sound funny, but I think having been at a number of, really good universities, it's pushed me around in different disciplines, different departments. There's not just one way to do things. Policy is really important. Politics are important. And even in universities, we need to just kind of figure out how to do the whole problem. And if you can't do the whole problem all the different ways, well, then you just get help. So it's helped me kind of be brave in not sticking to my lane.
And I want now to go a bit deeper into the problems. I've tried to summarize and think we have the energy access, we have transportation, we have biodiversity, fuel, aviation. So I want to go now one by one with you, trying to understand a bit. And I want to start with something that, being in Africa, is something that is discussed a lot. It's about energy access and energy transformation. We are well aware that, let's say, in the developed Western world, now there is a transition. And of course, in the past, we have been, and the development path has been fueled mainly by fossil fuels and coal and others. So now, which strategies now we can have energy access and promoting sustainable development, which is needed, especially for the so-called emerging market, while not using the same dirty fuels?
I love this question. And your question is about energy access. And I've been working with people on this question for a while. Yes, energy access is needed. More energy access is needed. And I don't think there's kind of a tendency to approach it from an energy first perspective. To say, these people need energy, we're going to install it, and we have solved the problem. And, often in some ways, the people are doing just fine, or what they really need is something different. And also, there's been a lot of installation of small amounts of electricity, runs a cell phone, super important, provides television. People want to watch television, but doesn't allow for cooking with electricity, which needs a lot more electricity. And I understand that. And it's quite interesting, however, because it's cooking with biomass that has big health impacts. So it's not obvious that cooking with electricity is the way people want to go. You need to ask the people who are cooking how they want to cook. It doesn't work to tell people. So I think more of an internal, more thinking about the benefits, more involvement of the people who would be getting the energy, speaking about what they need or want. Progress is slow.
And how do you see also maybe in the developed world this discussion? For example, from your observatory in the US, do you think that we really have a transition in energy, especially talking about now the so-called developed world, or especially now the discussion that is there and the coming back of fossil fuel will regress a bit the progress done so far?
Having in the developed world, in the United States, a walking transition. I don't mean we're walking more. I mean, it's at the walking pace, andante. The transition is happening. It's not very fast. And we're having a lot of transitions at the same time. There's, AI coming along in terms of technology. There's jobs, there's, fertility, there's all kinds of things. The energy transition is, comparatively speaking, not that hard and not very disruptive to people's lives. You will find people complaining about wind turbines, but that's not roiling society. It's so we are slowly having a transition. Yeah. The technologies are better, and lots of lifestyle changes. People don't change their lifestyles rapidly for their own benefit, but people are realizing energy efficiency, other modes of transport, so on, are a little better, and they're taking them up slowly.
From your perspective, thank you. And then I think that is sometimes the pace, but of course we need to recognize that is there. From your academic perspective and the research, can you share with our listeners some of the research that you are now focused on and some of the impacts that you foresee?
Yes. Okay. I have a big portfolio. One of them is freight. We're working on freight transportation, moving things. They go, trucks, rail, air, ship, looking both at different fuels that could be used, biofuels, hydrogen, things like that. And also, well, just can we do it more efficiently? And so one aspect is that it's kind of obvious. Freight delivered by airplanes is not very efficient. Freight delivered by trucks is more efficient. And sometimes trucks can get goods to places just as fast as aircraft. And rail is much more efficient. And moving things by water is much more efficient. So there's a lot we could do if we did more rail. Comparing the US and Europe is famous for just such a great rail system. Europe does really well on passenger rail. And in the US, we have less passenger rail. We have a lot more freight, but still it has a reputation for being slow. If you want something to get there in a good time, you don't send it by rail. So we can do a lot with just getting rid of the bottlenecks of, how you transition from, one stop to another. A different concept, an additional concept we call the physical internet. And what that gets across is the idea that when we're moving goods, if you could be really connected and efficient, not necessarily having a truck if it needs to go, here I am in Atlanta, if it needs to go from Atlanta to Chicago, not necessarily on just one truck from Atlanta to Chicago. Maybe you go to hubs and switch things out so that you can share amongst different trucks cargo that needs to go to different places. So speeding up, not the speed of the truck, but making it more efficient, having truckers actually not have to drive as far, you can do a lot with that. And to keep going on about this, then, okay, are we going to power these trucks with diesel fuel? Are we going to use renewable diesel? Are we going to use electric, or are we going to use hydrogen? And we're trying to figure that out. There are lots of bets on hydrogen. Great fuel, really great fuel. And when you burn hydrogen, you just get water coming out, water vapor coming out of the tailpipe. So it's great. So far, we are not making enough hydrogen with low carbon footprint. We make a lot of hydrogen from natural gas. It's easy as part of normal kind of refining processes that at oil refineries it's used a lot. So it's not a new trick to make hydrogen. We make it. But making it in a really clean way, you take water and you split it with electricity. That works great. Some of the listeners may have done this in middle school science class or something like that. You can split water and you get oxygen coming out one side and hydrogen on the other. It takes pretty much electricity to do that. Again, really known process. So you kind of end up needing a lot of solar power, a lot of renewables to do that really nicely. So you need cheap renewables. And so it's a big project.
Yeah, we have discussed in the past about the so-called blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, white hydrogen, all sorts of colors. But of course, it's still there, and we really still need the breakthrough to really get into to unlock the development of the technology. And you discussed about fuels. There is a lot of hype and discuss about aviation and biofuels. What do you think about these alternatives that are there, and how we can even clean, especially this, and make the dream of sustainable aviation fuels?
Society uses lots of transportation fuels. And even in the United States, which is a large country, not very highly populated for its size, we don't have enough space to make all of our fuels from biofuel. We just don't. We want to keep agriculture growing nicely. We want to keep our trees and our forests. We want space that isn't totally used up. So it's just long been recognized you can't do everything, but you can do some. And some of it could be, the more you do, the more you start impinging on maybe, land that could be used for agriculture, the more there's risk of, to biodiversity and things like that. But at a modest level, maybe it can, really be great. So what does a modest level mean? Modest level could mean all of our jet fuel. We could run all our airplanes on biofuel, and then that's it, So right now in the United States, we're making biofuel, a lot of biofuel from corn, lots of controversy about that. And we use that corn for just in our gasoline for cars. If we could make the same amount of biofuel, make it from things like low value forest wastes. Here in the United States, our forest products industry, especially the pulp and paper industry, well, it's smaller now than it used to be. It's a lot smaller because people are using less paper, right? More sustainable. We just use our laptops and we just read and we send PDFs. That is great. We even know how to do double-sided copying in some places. So there's less demand for paper. That's kind of great all over, except for the people who used to work in those paper mills that are, largely closed down, and the forests that used to, have some material going to making paper, that kind of closing industrial infrastructure could be used to make biofuels and use maybe about the same amount of forest products, not just material from forests. There's agricultural waste. There's a lot of material waste, even from cities, that we can convert into fuels. And at that level, it's workable. An issue here, lots of these wonderful sustainable technologies have become cheap. Not true for fuel for airplanes. The biofuel we make from corn, that is cheap. That's as cheap as gasoline. But making jet fuel is still not as cheap as petroleum jet fuel. So that's a challenge to bring those prices down enough. And you've got to have cheap feedstocks. So there's no real risk you're going to go after big, valuable timber trees. You just couldn't afford it. But low value feedstock to slowly transition and stand up an infrastructure to make that is something we can do. And there is a risk of policies mandating a lot of these kinds of fuels, especially if fuels are coming from places where there aren't checks on, where did this biomass come from? How did you get this? How did you get this so cheap? But if it can just be regulated, that can help assure that we can keep the spaces used, monitored.
And then, of course, the discussion about biofuels. I mean, having lived the Jatropha revolution that failed in Africa and many others, and now the castor oil and all this. So, of course, as you say, the competition and with the human and feedstock, it's always at the first concern that we have on this side of and of course also affordability and work. Another thing that I want to ask you, there is a lot of hype and discussion about the new technology and innovation, and especially in the US, but not only there, there's a lot of push about carbon capture. This miracle technology that should solve all our problems. Being, an engineer, physics, we know that carbon dioxide, that it is very difficult also to trap. Is correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, but 0.04 of our air. And so how this technology can deliver on its promise? And what do you think about it?
Yeah, so I've worked on carbon capture. I've worked on capturing carbon dioxide from the air. All right, so you're right. It's from the point of view of, go out and catch those molecules. It seems like, and there isn't, that much carbon dioxide in the air. It's more efficient if you can find some industrial or PowerPoint stack and you could capture it there because it's more concentrated because they're burning coal or something like that. So there's lots of CO2. So that's more efficient. Even so, when you get out into regular air, the concentration is quite a bit lower, 100 times lower. But the work need to do the whole capture process isn't proportional to how low it is. So you don't need 100 times. It's not 100 times harder to capture it. It's maybe 2 or 3 or it's maybe four times harder. Yeah. So you can capture it. You can capture it with materials that will capture carbon dioxide. And that's other than that, you need to make sure there's air blowing over your capturing surface. That's pretty easy to do. The hard part is you've captured it now. You've got it stuck all over your capturing surface, and you need to get it off because it's a valuable surface and you want to keep using it. So you've got to heat it up to do that, and that uses some kind of energy. So that's one challenge, but it doesn't take more. Even you can use natural gas as your source of heat to get the carbon dioxide off. That would seem to be not a great strategy because you burn natural gas and then more CO2 comes out. But you can win even if you're using natural gas as your source. Okay. Now, however, what really is a big challenge is what can we do with this carbon dioxide? If you need to go and bury it deep underground, it's doable and it's not hugely expensive, but it's not providing a benefit to anyone. No one's going to pay you to put carbon dioxide in some underground cap. That is the main strategy because we need to do a lot of this. But there are some strategies where, okay, we capture the carbon dioxide. Can we use it somehow? One way is make fuel from it, just like we were talking about. So we have looked at, let's capture the carbon dioxide and then feed it to blue-green algae. They need more, they're like little plants. They need carbon dioxide to grow. And so feed it to them to help make them grow faster and then make fuel. And that does work. It's not as cheap as gasoline. It's not as cheap as diesel fuel. It's but that's the kind of thing that people are working on, is finding ways to use the fuel, to use the carbon dioxide in some way. There's some more obvious ways, like, a little bit more in greenhouses, or lots of tomatoes and things are grown, can make things grow a little faster. So it's capturing carbon dioxide even from the air is one of the more expensive technologies, but it's not necessarily the most expensive technology. So it's kind of competing with things like this green hydrogen as one of the things you can do, not as the solution to our problem. The solution to our problem is we're going to capture the carbon dioxide from the air. No, there's lots of cheaper things we can do. Like I was saying before, send your freight by rail. We have rail. You just, do it a little more efficiently, do all those things. But still, we do all those things. We can do a lot of them. There are some things we're still going to have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So at the, 10% level, some of these expensive things, and hopefully they'll become less expensive, we'll figure something out, will be part of the solution.
Thank you, Valerie. It's really, I think scale is also important. And of course, we can say we often discuss about one golden ticket or why silver bullet, carbon capture or EV or other. So instead, if I recall and can understood correctly, we need to have a wider portfolio of solution, and of course, balancing and putting them at scale to really solve our problem in that. And I want to, if you can share with us, what are you planning for this new year 25? Which are, and maybe in the next years in your research, which are the areas you are looking at, especially, and that you think they are most promising?
One thing I'm working on is helping to make industry more efficient. So I have several projects with the paper industry. We do still have a paper industry. We make lots of boxes even for transporting freight. We do have paper. And can we make it more efficient? Making industry more efficient is great because they could save money, hopefully, and be more efficient, make their products better. So one of the projects that I'm working on now is, a problem with making paper is you make it wet, you make pulp, you have it in water, you've got to dry it. Drying pretty much everywhere is really energy intensive. Drying clothes and your laundry, because you've got to get rid of all of that water. You've got to basically evaporate all the water. So we're working on, I love it. Can we just squeeze the pulp? Can we squeeze more of the water out of the pulp so we don't have to dry it so much? It's kind of like, not exactly, but kind of like the spin cycle in someone's dryer. You get the water out by squeezing it. So we're working on that. I love that because it sounds so simple and obvious. People have thought about this before. They do it already. We're just trying to figure out how to do it better. The way I think about it, if you have a sponge, right, and it's all full of water and you put it down on your kitchen counter, and then if you press on it, water will come out all over the kitchen counter. You press on it, water comes out, but then you lift your hand up, some of that water will get sucked back into the sponge. So it's that little bit we're trying to solve. Is there a way you can squeeze down on the sponge, the water comes out, but then when you stop squeezing, it doesn't bring the water back up? And so what are some clever ways? So that's one way. Something we're proposing to do is working on the semiconductor industry. Okay. Semiconductors are everywhere. They use energy, and it's not just energy. And while there's CO2 for making the energy, there are lots of these, what I'll call fancy greenhouse gases. They've got fluorine and other things. They're called F gases sometimes. They are kind of created in this really complicated process, and they go out into the atmosphere, and relatively small amounts, huge impact on the climate on a pound for pound basis. And there are also what are called PFAS that are made from this, and all the processing that's being done to make semiconductor devices. So we're trying to figure out how can we, using AI and machine learning, to work through lots of different ways of doing this processing to figure out ways that can be more energy efficient, need less water use. That's another one. Have less emissions of toxics, less emissions of greenhouses. So we put a big team together to see if we can do that.
And that is fantastic, because with the huge request for semiconductors, and I mean the chip war that is also now become part of the business literature, we really need also to since the demand will be huge, to make them in a more sustainable way. The forever chemicals, the discussion there, and that's a really the dark side. Not discussing about the energy consumption of EI and all of that. So it's really an important part. Do you think that we'll be able to, and when do you think we can have breakthrough, especially in production? And what is, because we, especially in this moment, I want to ask you, there is a lot of discussion about how you read the newspaper. We have this new technology. I don't know, the battery from paper just invented, or this and that, this wonderful, the cement. But then you don't see them coming to scale. They remain maybe a niche, or they just stay in a wonderful 235 publication in an academic paper. How we can transition from, let's say, academic and war to really practice? Which are the barriers that you see there that they are not yet putting new technology at scale?
Yes, the valley of death. So that's a great question. How can we get really good ideas to be implemented? So first of all, there are some that work and some that don't. And we should be prepared for that. If you want to have a whole bunch of people working on new ideas, let's crank them out as well as we can. They're all expensive at the beginning. And some of them really succeed by getting to be much cheaper, and some don't. There's some that even get more expensive over time. So that's another thing, nuclear power. So it comes up. Here I am sitting in the United States. The progress that China has made versus the progress that the US has made. Lots of research that is invented in the US has been implemented elsewhere. And from a global perspective, fantastic, right? We have fantastic development in technology that has become so much cheaper, implemented to a large part in other countries. And it's not just China. We can look to Germany, did amazing things with deployment of renewables like solar, especially at scale. And by deploying at scale with technology produced in China at scale, they really got the cost down. So there's a lot to be said about having steady, long-term, large programs very hard to pick the winners. You can do some analysis of what might be a winner, but it's still a surprise. It was a surprise that solar became so cheap, a surprise that wind became so cheap, a surprise that batteries have become so cheap, kind of a surprise that biofuels, these advanced biofuels that are just like petroleum but aren't, kind of a surprise that they're not cheap. So I think it's expensive to deploy new technologies. We've been going at it. We're going at it now with hydrogen. I don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work, and nobody does. We're just working at it. But having a real focus and thinking about, what is there a role for government in the deployment of technologies? That's something to think strongly about. You don't want industries to be pampered and bailed out. And on the other hand, deploying at scale, it's hard to do that with just industry on its own working uphill when their new product is going to be more expensive than what's incumbent. It's a hard problem.
So the role of subsidies and support, at least to get them at scale, is still crucial. I mean, I was reading on some publication that if you can get the price of hydrogen lower in production, that will help also uptake and of the technology. Of course, that is that gap. And since now the cost is not yet there, we are slow in implementation. So I think there is still a role for government without wastage, and especially now with the backlash against government and discussion against it. So we really need to be working carefully the balance. But of course, I mean, if we see all the deployment of technology from the internet to the others, they all been backed by public money at the beginning, and then they became, I mean, private. And thank you, Valerie. It's really a lot of food for thoughts, especially the one for semiconductors is really interesting because, and of course, the your work on the freight and biofuels and discussion, because I really like what you pointed out. Biofuels, they were hyped in the 90s, the early 2000s, especially here in Africa. We had people coming, promising farmers to plant thousands of jatropha, thousands of castor oil, while then, or ethanol, or all sort of stuff. Then why they failed? Because the price was never there. So we'll see now if with those new deployments, how they will also, let's say, support the transition to different type of fuels. And if I can give you a last question, I mean, for your insightful discussion, which would it be the message you can give? Of course, some listener might say, wow, this professor, they're in academia studying at the frontier of technology. But for somebody as a lay people, and from your also choice at the beginning, transitioning from the nuclear reduction and studies towards environment, which advice you would want to give to our listeners?
So my advice is, it sounds trite, but it is true. Individual people can make a difference. Individual people, you can think about. Some people ask me, what should I do? And I advise taking the point of view that there are things that you can do that will also benefit you. There might be lots of them. Have the imagination so that it doesn't make sense if you drove to work today to get the idea, whoa, I care about the environment. I'm not going to drive home. Of course you're going to drive home. Of course you're going to do these things, but there could be, just explore what else you might try that could benefit you, and that other people might see their way towards because you do it. You don't need to tell other people what to do, but more efficiency in your business or in your own personal life. It just sounds, I don't know, a little bit like accounting and so on, but accounting is good. It's how people get rich. So just being open to maybe some really new things just to try, because you're trying them yourself. You don't have to try them 6 times. Trying them 3 or 4 times might be good enough.
And thank you so much, Valerie, for this episode and for your research and discussion. And it was really a pleasure and honor having you at the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.